That's right.
Absolutely. Let's do this. I want to play this clip real quick from the 700 Club's Pat Robertson, and he's discussing critical race theory. And I want to have a brief chat about that, and then we're going to be joined. Professor Mac, do me a favor and connect with our producer David in the chat room. We want to make sure we got that ball rolling. But this is how much they fear critical race theory. And you know what? If people like this fear it that much, maybe that's all the more reason we need to double and triple down on it. Let's take a look at it.
That the people of color have been oppressed by the white people.
What?
And the white people begin to be racist by the time they're 2 or 3 months old. And therefore, the people of color have to rise up and overtake their oppressors, and then, having gotten the whip handle, if I can use that term, then to instruct their white neighbors how to behave. Now, that's critical race theory.
Well, so actually it's not, but it does not sound that bad when you consider you all let 600,000 people die from COVID-19 because of your ignorance. When you consider the number of black people who are killed by police disproportionately. So when you consider the barbarism of Western civilization, you think about Christopher Columbus. You guys celebrate Christopher Columbus, and the Native Americans had to survive him. Right. When you really do the sum total of what your culture has done, then perhaps that should be the interpretation of critical race theory, but it's not.
No,
it's
but
not.
Brother Dixon, let me tell you, this is, you brought me on to bring this historical perspective. And I've never seen this brother talking about what he thinks is critical race theory. I don't know how old that footage is, but the reason I'm laughing is because what he's telling you is what white folks have thought from the day that they enslaved our people. He just told you exactly. I can pull a passage from Thomas Jefferson saying exactly what he said. The exact thing. Jefferson said, "I tremble when I think of my God, and God is a just God. And this will not go on forever." He says, "I can view a day when the wheels of fortune would reverse." He said the exact same thing. George Washington. Blacks fought in the American Revolution, and so the Congress decided, no, we're going to kick them all out, because they were afraid that based on the oppression that they was giving us, now you want to arm us and say fight for us, that we would do it. And then Lord Dunmore of Virginia said to blacks in his Dunmore Proclamation, "Any blacks that fight for us, we'll grant you your freedom." Shit, man, we went over there like 20,000 strong in a hurry, quick and in a hurry. And then the Continental Congress changed it. Even Abraham Lincoln and this Congress, remember now, when the Civil War started, they forbade blacks to take up arms and to fight for our own freedom. It was pressure from Thomas, Frederick Douglass, Charles Sumter, Thaddeus Stevens, and those radical Republicans that just kept putting pressure on Lincoln, that even in the Emancipation Proclamation, that's when he opened it up for us to fight. So this fear of this revolution and this revenge factor that we may take has permeated through America from day one. And I'm telling you now that those who are against the critical race theory, they have that same level of fear. It's just
yeah. Georgia, real quick on, I want to ask in context of the Derek Chauvin sentencing that we just came across, and you were one of two journalists in the nation to be in that verdict, not the verdict rather, but the sentencing. I'm curious in terms of the erasure and the whitewashing of history, because that defense attorney would really like to paint the picture of what happened to George Floyd. He would like to whitewash Derek Chauvin and the bloody murder of the brutal murder of George Floyd with the same whitewashing brush as America has done Christopher Columbus and Western culture and civilization, all the things that they celebrate. They really would like to rewrite the history for Derek Chauvin, wouldn't they?
Oh yeah, you saw that day in and day out of the trial. Every day, Attorney Nelson coming in and basically saying that there was no way George Floyd died from a knee on his neck, that it was due to drugs and it was due to the positive COVID test and all of these other absurd things. And he actually had different experts come in and help try to tell that story. Even all the way up to sentencing, where we saw Derek Chauvin's mother come in and reaffirm that he's a good man and really just not even acknowledge what happened. So much so to a fault where, I don't know if you guys noticed when we play that clip, she said on November 25th. I don't know where that woman has been, but this
Right.
incident did not happen on November 25th. The entire world, not just America, the entire world knows that George Floyd was killed on May 25th.
Right.
So I think that you're absolutely right. And for me as a journalist, it goes back to the importance of narrative. And I keep trying to build a broader awareness about the power mainstream media has, because they're really the first line of defense to archive a lot of stories.
Right.
And so we give them a lot of power. We give mainstream media a lot of power to archive our stories, when a good case of this was the James Baldwin interview that ABC did in 1979, and they never actually aired it. So we give them our stories. They're following this trial. Who else independently, especially in our community, in the Black community, is archiving these stories, these facts, to have an independent account? Because if we leave it up to them, history will repeat itself, and they will do what they did, the same thing they did with slavery, the same thing that they did with lynchings, and George Floyd. We just had an attorney say this was a modern day lynching, and for a lot of the lynchings, they try to cover it up. They try to justify it. They make it more palatable, all of those things. So I think that you're right. And, in covering this case, there was a piece of information that I actually wanted to run by Dr. Mack. We here in Minneapolis, I'm headquartered in Minneapolis right now, and since George Floyd was killed on May 25th, 2020, the intersection where he was murdered has been shut down. And there were a group of organizers who came together, created 24 demands, and they have preserved that space. They've put barricades up. Recently, June 3rd, I think, was the day the city came in, removed the barricades. The barricades were put back up. June 15th, they came back in. So there's been this tug of war more recently, but we're looking at now over 390 days that there has been this ongoing protest in that space. And so it brought me to this question of what is the longest protest in American history? And I don't know if you know that off top, but the one a lot of people pointed to was the bus boycott, which I think was 381 days. And the question now being, is the protest at George Floyd Square, the intersection where he is killed, the longest protest in American history?
Well, again, based on how we define protest today, in this kind of knee-jerk reaction to an event, one could look at the Montgomery bus boycott, as you stated, for 381 days. One could look at this. Well, I would tell you what America doesn't want to recognize. And so if I think about it in a critical way, I would say this: the day that they started enslaving Black folks, that protest from that day. And even when you look in the vice president of the Confederacy was a man named Alexander Stephens. He wrote this speech called the Cornerstone Speech. And he starts off by saying the agitating questions relating to our peculiar institution, the agitating questions. I promise you, this agitation about us being free started from the day we were enslaved in this country. So if you look at, and again, most people want to think we sat on the sideline and didn't do anything. Like, for instance, Joe Brown, the former judge. I mean, the dude's an idiot. And I'm calling him an idiot because I'm not going to spare him. He literally said Juneteenth is Black folks taking an L. I took his gavel and told him he's turned this into a kangaroo court, and I took his black card. So because again, he's obviously not aware or want to recognize our history. So this protest has been going for a while. But to your point, I do recognize, the question that you're putting in. And, outside of the Montgomery bus boycott and that length of time, I would say this, but what is clear is that the George Floyd protest is by far the largest protest in the history of this country. This protest involved well over 25 million people.
Wow.
There is not a protest that I know of in this nation that even came close to that. I literally thought Rodney King was, at the time, I thought Rodney King was the largest protest, if you will. And even before that, you go to the 1963 March on Washington. When we marched on Washington, there was somewhere between 200, if you put a large spectrum to it, 250, 300,000 people that came to that protest. 25 million, in every state in the union, all over the world, nothing even close to the reaction that the murder of George Floyd caused from a protest standpoint in this country.
We're discussing critical race theory and the Derek Chauvin sentencing that just took place over the weekend, but we're also talking about Juneteenth and the history, the accurate history, and the necessity for history to be told accurately and archived. Georgia, I appreciate the way you framed it, because that's what's happening with the media. They are the official archivers, and if they are archiving it through their lens, then our future is doomed to be the interpretation of people who don't look like us and don't have the same fights and struggles as us. And that includes a conversation on Juneteenth.